thank you for just for being here in the first place. You know, like that's the main thing, as being able to talk to cool people. And I guess the thing that caught my eye first was, I love comic books. I've written some comic books. I made a few for myself as well. Really
Yeah.
enjoy them. I felt like some of the greatest ideas tend to come in comic book form, even sometimes when maybe the writing isn't there, or like some older comics, it's just maybe a bit flat or whatever. The idea itself, the kernel of the idea, I find is really, really interesting. And
Mhm.
then I saw some of the stuff you were doing. You were making zines. I think that's what caught me to begin with. You were making the Ghost Town series, right? You had Drumheller, which I haven't heard that name since I was a child. Drumheller Valley,
Yeah.
Alberta Coal Ranch, and Historical Redcoat Trail. I think. Like, how
Yeah.
did that start? First of all, maybe we should go all the way back. I
Sure.
heard some interesting stuff. You said farm, like rural Alberta, I guess, growing up,
Rural
or
Saskatchewan, if
rural
you believe it.
Saskatchewan. I was going to ask you about Saskatchewan because you said you were out there in the forest or in the camp or camping of some degree.
Yeah.
So okay, so it started off in Saskatchewan,
Yeah.
farming.
I'm southern Saskatchewan, born and raised. Small agricultural center, sort of right smack dab in the middle of the bottom, 30 miles from the Montana border.
Oh,
So like real deep down there. There's actually I do not go back often and haven't been back in quite some time, but there's a bit of a drawl, I guess you could say. You don't notice when you live there, and then you go back and you say, "Boy, that's as close as we get to a southern drawl in Canada." I think is kind of down where I am. There's a little bit of twang, a little bit of drawl to the
all
voices.
right.
So yeah, and like lots of people in Calgary here in Alberta, Saskatchewan boy came out west, and you make it as far as the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, and you don't leave. So I'm kind of here now, and I kind of always said when I was a kid, I want to live in the Rocky Mountains. That was sort of always my growing up on Bald Prairie. I kind of the romanticism of mountains kind of was something that was always a draw. So I'm close to the mountains. I'm not in the mountains, but I'm close to the mountains.
It's true. I think, um, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember back when I was a kid in Calgary, I used to be able to look off into the horizon, and you can kind of see a mountainous like terrain.
You get a pretty nice view of the mountains. The whole western, southern, and western view you get on a nice clear day. Boy, do you get a nice panorama. You get about that much of mountain across the horizon, which is nice. It's nice to see. It would be nicer even perhaps to be right in the mountains, but I like my sunshine as well. So
Yeah.
being being too surrounded, people I know who live right in the mountains sometimes say I couldn't take it because the for us effectively sunset was 3 p.m. because it goes behind a mountain,
And you're done.
and there you go. So I still like my big wide open blue skies. That's for me. I still need that.
Okay. It's been a while. I'm gonna have to try to get to the prairie one day because I when I moved to British Columbia, I don't think I appreciated the mountains out there like the way it is. Because I remember I went to like elementary school and there's a giant mountain called like Golden Ears or something,
Oh
like
yeah.
just right there. And you basically, to get to the top of that mountain, I think it takes like 12 hours or something of hiking. Maybe more, maybe something more than that. Like you go halfway and it's like 6 hours. I think another 6 hours to the top. There's a glacier. So I was like, oh yeah, okay, cool, whatever. You know, but I'm angsty and angry because I'm a teenager and the world is around me. I don't know why, but that's definitely a problem. Like I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to do something with my life sooner or later. So yeah, I don't think I experienced it the way that I should have, but it's pretty beautiful.
Yeah, they've got a pretty nice out on the coast there. I was in Vancouver last August, and boy, like to have to be bookended by a mountain on one side and the ocean on the other is a pretty interesting place to find yourself.
No, that's for sure. That's for
Maybe
sure.
maybe in the world of climate change, it's a very frightening place to find yourself, I'm sure. But it was pretty cool to be able to look one way and see a mountain, and look the other way and be looking out on like Georgia Bay or whatever it is, or the looking at the ocean, looking at standing in Stanley Park is pretty nice.
Absolutely. So let me ask you, How did art come into the game? How did creating art come into the game? How did that first grab you?
Yeah, art is luckily, even in our little small town, um, I was pretty interested in art as a kid, and luckily my friends, quite a few of my friends were as well. One of my friends is is a comic book artist now, and has been one that's been actually doing stuff for God, about 20 years. I think he's been doing it. He's been doing it pretty much professionally since around 2001, 2003, somewhere in there. So I did have a good group of friends that we were all kind of interested in art, lots of doodling, lots of sketching, lots of, drawing stuff from our favorite comic books and from our favorite comic book artists when we were kids. And then when I was a bit older, um, my I have two sisters, and one of my sisters is 3 years older than I am. And when she left to go to school, she went for fine arts. So that was a big influence on me as well to say, oh, geez, I guess you could go do that, right, and pursue that kind of thing. Um, and then when it came time for me to leave high school, um, it was okay. What am I going to do? My friend that I talked about, who's the comic book artist, said, "Hey, I know you're thinking about art stuff. It's the only thing we kind of talk about in terms of like what could we do in the future." Um, I applied to Medicine Hat College, and it's got a pretty good program there from what we can see. So he said, I'm thinking of applying here. So I said, boy, that might be good. So we actually took a trip out there, he and I, um, uh, to do a visit to the school. You kind of did a day in the life sort of thing, a day in the program. So you'd go and attend, 4 classes that day,
Cool.
just as an observer, and just be able to kind of see what they're doing. And it was really cool. So I went in there with my friend Ryan, and we got to sit in on a computer design course. And I learned then that I didn't understand how Illustrator and Photoshop worked. Um, and then we sat in some drawing classes and some other classes like that. So, and we were just like, hey, this is cool. And the people around us, we were, talking to, we got to interact with some of the students. And I was like, these just seem like real cool folks, real nice, real chill, real cynical, real smarmy, just like me. So I was like, I can fit in here because I'm just as too cool for school and smarmy as the rest of these kids. These 19-year-olds. I could be one of these 19-year-olds. So yeah, we both applied, and there was a portfolio process to get in, and luckily we both made it in. I threw together a portfolio in like, I don't even remember, probably weeks rather than months, right? And just luckily it was strong enough to get me in there. And despite my lack of skills with the computer programs, that eventually the path I took and came out as a graphic designer. So yeah, art was something that was at least somewhat constant in my life, in some fashion or the other. I didn't know how it would turn into a career, and 20 years on, maybe I still don't. But um, coming out of school, my friend Ryan went to Saskatoon. He various places in Saskatchewan, but he went back to Saskatchewan, where I came straight to Calgary, and then found myself of like, okay, now you got to pay for rent. I had my longtime partner, who is now my spouse, um, with me, and she was still going to school at that point. So I was going, okay, how am I going to pay rent? How am I going to live? How am I going to support the two of us? And now I've got student loans I got to pay off. And luckily, I got a job in a little print shop doing graphic design. And then some opportunities just fell in my lap to become a freelancer. And I've been a freelancer ever since. So that's a little over 20 years ago. I kind of struck out on my own. And times have been tough the last 4 or 5 years, but now I'm able to Now I'm doing the comic stuff and doing, trying to do other side stuff that I've always wanted to do, like comics and zines. I do background extra work in TV and movies because now there's a pretty cool scene of film production stuff that's out here. So that's why the beard ends up being down here, because we do a lot of westerns and a lot of things
Fantastic.
like that. So yeah, so I just try to now. As time goes on and AI starts absolutely tearing my industry apart, now I just go, okay, how can I stay fulfilled, but also hopefully still make a little bit of money.
Yeah, I could see that being a real issue. I know. Well, first of all, I did see the post where you were in My Life with the Walter Boys, and you walk past everybody. You like kind of
Yeah.
move somebody aside, another extra aside. I was like, yeah, slick.
Yeah, I'm all over that particular episode of that show. Just so happens that I'm all over that one. That's the most prevalent. That's one where I walk in front of the principal actors, which is always I thought was hilarious. I'm like, they got two very beautiful people talking to each other, and then they let this bearded guy walk past right and block and block them.
Blocked
So
them
that
completely.
I thought that was very funny. But yeah, I'm in about a quarter of a second of The Last of Us season one and a few other things as well. So
All right.
yeah,
But speaking of comics and zines, also you said a couple of things I wouldn't mind your opinion on it. I mean, I guess everybody talks about this, but since it's a thing, you said that AI is kind of tearing your industry apart, and you've been making some changes recently. How do you see the technology of now, and of course going forward, the way it's probably going to progress, and what they're doing there and what you're doing? How do you see some kind of a um I don't know, I want to say a coming together, or how can that be integrated, I guess, into what you're doing in order to not have all of our great artists or something just losing money and losing hope and not wanting to do this or something anymore. Like, I don't know, do you see a pathway forward? It sounds like you're keeping an optimistic mindset and doing things you want to do, like with the zines and the comics, but how do you feel
um,
about that?
well, I think you're going to see some of that nihilism from the comic books come out of me here, but I'll try and keep it as light as I can.
No, you don't
There's a
have to.
few
You just be honest. As if you think it's a terrible scenario, then that's your opinion. I'm fine with that.
there are a few things to consider in my view, the way that I look on it. Number one, I'm not sure what the path forward is for a lot of creatives. But on the flip side, there's always a flip side of both, right? But on the flip side, I've seen a lot of young people at markets I do with the comics and those sorts of things, who say like, "Hey, yeah, I art is important to me, and it's important that someone made it and that I can meet them, I can talk to them, and I can see that I'm getting somebody's feelings." So I'm seeing the pushback already from younger people on AI stuff, because they're like, we've been fed a lot of crap in our life already. We don't need more of that. I want to connect with a person. I want to get a thing that they made and connect with it personally. So, yeah, whether or not there's any living to be made in it, that's the trickier part. Um, yeah, I look at a lot of stuff, and here's the nihilism, and I go like, how is anybody going to have a job in 10 years? Everything's, everything from the writing, especially creative, any sort of content creation, and that's everything from the scope of my little zines I'm doing to YouTube and writers and journalists and anybody who's creating something that's consumed as the good is like the output of a person. um, it's going to be tough. I'm not sure what the path forward is there. And this is where I find myself leaning more and more to like a socialist mindset. I go like, hey man, maybe like I don't know how it's ever going to happen, but boy, that conversation that was being had in the last 4 years, 4 or 5 years about universal basic income and stuff like that starts making a lot more sense. To where maybe someone like myself could say, okay, that takes the strain off of, am I going to starve to death or lose my home? And makes it so that I can create something, be creating, and be working in a capacity that does something good and create something that people might want to, say, buy or purchase or consume or what have you. But um, the sale of this comic book isn't the difference between me losing my home or not. Just to take that pressure off of people. That those conversations start to come in. For young people wanting to do it, I've seen, boy, the young people I've met who are doing the creative stuff, they have been blowing my damn socks off. The creative output out of people and their passion for it is great. They're a little less cynical. And they're more energetic than I am. In my getting close to my mid-40s now. So it's the technology itself. Hopefully, I think people are trying to make the strides now to try to contain it as best they can into something that's where it can be used as a tool rather than something to replace people. The problem is the people who are creating the actual, say, AI or whatever systems themselves, they are hell-bent that they're going to replace people with it because that's their business model. It's the same complaints I had when things like these things like Squarespace and stuff like that were like some of the first hits against my business, where it was, I'm creating a lot of websites in my business for small businesses. And when someone could say, well, I could get someone like Charles who will learn my business inside out and help me to make it, but it's going to cost me some money to do that, some money and some time. Well, why don't I just get this, Squarespace or whatever else? That's just one example to quick and dirty this thing and maybe save some money. And it was detrimental, I saw, to a lot of people, because then they'd have let's face it, a crappy website that wasn't built with any craft and wasn't built with any expertise. And so I don't think it had good outcomes, but in the end, they saved some money, and that's what they focused on. And that is what a lot of the people who are creating the like AIs and that are let's face it, they are wholesale ripping off artists and creators. They are feeding that stuff in. Copyright be damned. Intellectual copyright, they aren't even letting that be a speed bump in the road that they're speeding down. And their goal is simply to take the money that would go towards that sector and absorb it into their own. That is their only goal. Their goal isn't to create art. Their goal is to make something that takes other people's art, regurgitates it, and it makes a revenue stream. So it's hard not to be really pessimistic about this stuff, because it's people's livelihoods that is like the coal being shoveled into the furnace of this freight train that is out of control, unless things like government regulation or the market speaking strongly against it. And I don't know what you can count on either of those things.
I think you're probably right. I feel like that's an issue that I have with it. It's probably the only issue. I don't mind if things progress and change. I know that it sucks a lot of times when things change, but I don't mind it. The problem I have is exactly what you just said, is it's like, hey, well, it's not okay for me to, like, if you've ever taken any classes about film production, they're going to have a class that's about rights, and that's about, you have to have a clean chain of rights is what it's called. And like even in a film, if somebody's going to do an alleyway scene, like it can go this far. You're going to do an alleyway scene. You find your location, perfect alleyway. It's got a lot of graffiti on it. They're going to repaint the wall and paint fake graffiti on it, because the person who illegally graffitied the wall is actually technically the artist. Therefore, they could possibly see the wall and go, hey, I'm the guy who did that, and sue your movie. So that was okay for all of us, I guess. And then in AI, it's like, well, we can't, it's difficult to say who we ripped off, so therefore we probably get away with it. That kind of stuff I don't love.
Yeah, and when you see them speaking right now to in hearings and that saying, well, of course we don't care about the copyright because that would be so prohibitive to the training of our AI that we wouldn't be able to do it. And then you're going, well, if you can't make this thing without committing crime the entire time, maybe that should tell you something. It's the same as me. I say, boy, I sure would like to get a new racing wheel. Boy, I sure would like to get a VR headset. Boy, I sure would like to get some new guitars. But I can't do that unless I rob this bank,
Mm-hmm. It's like, well,
right?
see, let's. I'm putting on a mask, like give me
Yeah.
the striped
Whereas
white shirt.
yeah, for them, they're like, okay, great. Where's the
Like,
stocking?
great.
Pull the stocking over and let's go.
Let's
Where the
get the
rest of
machine
us have
guns.
to go, wait a second, pump the brakes.
Yeah.
So yeah, ethics and technology are it's such the ethics in especially bleeding edge technology is such a minefield that and I don't think that the players who are in it are living up to that, to upholding that. So then you go, boy, as like, especially as me, as just like a rinky-dink artist making comics with a friend and making these little zines for myself. How are you ever gonna compete with that? How are you ever going to provide resistance to that? How are you ever going to like you feel you feel like you are standing in front of that freight train and it's like, oh, I'm about to be vaporized.
Jeez.
So yeah, it's scary shit.
And I think that's
Sorry,
why
I don't know if I can speak cuss words
Oh
on.
yeah, you can say what you want to say, man. Don't worry about it. I'm
I will
not.
try
This
to.
is an adult conversation. I never have like this isn't for children or anything really. So I
Sure.
figure we're old guys, so probably that's who's gonna want to watch this in the first place. But no, you can say what you want to say. And yeah, that's why I phrased the question that way too, was because I try to say, okay, well, once a thing exists, it exists. And as much as we want to be, if we want to be unhappy or afraid or scared or things are going to change, they probably will anyway. So that's why I was like, is there a way to integrate this, or is there a way to say, okay, you're able to do this, I'm going to come over here and do this other thing that you just can't do because I'm a human being and it is what it is. Or
Yeah,
do we
I
just
think out of
go back to
necessity.
Saskatchewan and we started farming again?
Well, I hope not, because I was a terrible farmer. There's a reason I'm not on a farm. I was bad at it. You can ask I'm sure people will tell you I was not a good farmer.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I think out of necessity, people will find a way to pivot. Like I said, there is a market out there. There's a market of people out there. It's just not very big, right? But you can find your niche. I've only been making comics. So my friend Gord Cummings from Calgary, who's now based in Edmonton, he came to me in summer of 2022 and said, "Hey, I've got this comic with your skills. Could you take my artwork, clean it up, make it ready for print?" And that sort of, I said, "Oh yeah, for sure." And then it sort of steamrolled, and I became a part of this collaboration with him, where I do now, some of the artwork, some of the writing, some of the all the lettering and the book design sort of stuff, and we kind of steamrolled it. But we found that, like, if you're making something interesting, you can find that niche of people who can be really like, sometimes it's people who don't even realize that they'll be into your stuff, become into your stuff when they see it. Especially because we deal a lot in Canadian history. We have some young people see it and be like, "Oh, I didn't even know that this was a thing that happened." Um, and we look at a lot of stuff that has parallels to today. So we look at a lot of like social and labor movements, that the same conversations they were having in, say, 1910s to 1930s, same damn things we're talking about now. Talking about like food security, inequality, class system, homelessness. The same things were happening then that they are right now. Almost to a T.
Wow.
So when you show that to a young person and they go, boy, this is just like the tent cities downtown in Edmonton. And you say, yeah, the same thing was happening. And this is how they handled it, which was really poor. And so it's a good thing for us to look at again to say, look at how we're making those same mistakes today. And we kind of, we like to think a lot about like social action and social responsibility in that. So if it also makes a young person say, hey, you know what, I recognize that something has been bothering me, and now I see that there's like, okay, we need to take action about this sort of stuff. You know, you need to write some letters, you need to maybe get out to a protest. That's really wild stuff to us. That's really like makes it feel like we're doing something that's important.
Wow, that's amazing. So, okay, let me run it back and ask you about that. These zines. Um, so you basically was this how that started? Your friend said, "Hey, can you clean up some of this stuff?" And we're going to work on
Yeah.
those ghost town zines. But also, I
So
noticed
the ghost
zines in
town
general. Oh, sorry, I'll let you finish.
the ghost town zines are a personal project that I'm creating on my own.
Oh,
For me,
okay.
it started out as a, okay, I better start, if I'm going to start creating small issues for our collaboration, I better start making some stuff on my own. So I practice and writing and drawing and doing those things. So that those came out of more of that, of me saying, okay, I need to start making some personal work to um, to practice and to get better at this and to get my brain on that route. A lot of the stuff that we create, so the collaboration that my friend Gordon and I do, it's called Genki Comics, and we deal mostly in Canadian history, Canadian identity, um, like I said, labor and social
Okay.
movements, as well as like Indigenous reconciliation um, and immigration, like those sorts of topics. Those are the kind of topics that have been, whether or not you're aware of them or not in Canada, have been in the consciousness, like have been like the running themes of Canada for for as long as Canada has been a Canada.
Yeah.
It has been all about our identity, our history, and how we tell that history and what history lives, and who writes it, and how we deal with our immigration policies, our foreign policy, and our Indigenous population, and the all the crap we've done with that. So, with you
That's
know,
a way to put it.
every, yeah, like everything from displacing and committing genocide to then how we have continually had this rolling. You know, 60s Scoop was a big one for one mini issue that we did. It was about the what in Canada here is called the Indian Act, which was a piece of legislation in the Canadian Parliament that was to systematically continue to keep the Indigenous population down and under the thumb of the government and its agents, and then how that rolled into social work policy and created this thing that was called the 60s Scoop, which was a policy of social work professionals going in, essentially stealing the children of the Indigenous population and replacing those children with white Christian parents, white Christian families.
Wow.
It was to continue that idea that even back like our first prime minister, John A. Macdonald, said, you know, you kill the savage to save the child, kind of thing. So in their eyes, they were
Trying
going
to
to Christianize
integrate.
these,
Yeah.
assimilate
Try to
these
get some
children.
assimilation going by force, essentially.
Exactly. Christianize them, uh and then Bob's your uncle, and then
And then
that
Bob's
problem
your uncle.
here, right? So and I mean that continues. If you look up the 60s Scoop, you will find that there was also, it rolled straight into something that they called the millennial Scoop. They were still taking kids at the turn of the millennium.
Wow. But
Um,
this is a
so
thing I wonder about too, because I found myself for a lot of years kind of saying I do feel like Canada has always portrayed itself worldwide or media wide as the nice, polite country that's the always does the good thing. And yet when I would look at it, I'm like, I feel like as a country, or the policies aren't really all that different from the policies we say we're against. Most of the time, it was something I noticed. But as far as actual this kind of history, I don't know if it pops up that much. You mentioned Canadian identity, and if you asked me like what is a Canadian identity, I think if you asked a lot of people in Canada what is it, I would have nothing for you, you know. So what have you found is a common threat? Is it
So
just Indigenous torture or something better
well,
than that? What do we have?
exactly as you've said, if you were to ask your average person worldwide about a Canadian, they'd say, "Oh, they're very nice. They're kind of bland. There's not a lot of culture there, but they're very nice and they're very fun loving and generally a pleasing people." And Canada has been more than happy to let that be the prevailing narrative. You look at what's happened in the last 5 to 10 years in Canada with, say, the X-ray imaging of finding unmarked graves on residential school land was like a pulling of the veil off of that in a world, because that did take off worldwide. For them to say, hey, in this just this Kelowna school alone, residential school, we found possibly reflections of over 1,000 unmarked graves, things like that, and then finding imaging of that all over the place, because we the thing about Canada that a lot of people don't talk about is we're doing, like, we talk a lot of shit about our neighbors down south in America, but we were settled around the same time, so the same problems were happening. You come to a new land, people are living there, you want to live there, there's kind of one way that goes. So we were doing all of the same things that was happening in the United States. I think the next thing that will come out is some of the talk about, some people are already trying to beat the drum about this, about, yes, we were a safe haven for abolitionists and an eventual place for the Underground Railroad, but there was slavery in Canada. Not nearly to the extent of down south, but there was pockets of it up here.
Yeah.
And the same thing when we talk about Indigenous genocide and stealing the land, which is, of course, what we did, and we all still continue to reap the benefits of that. I'm living on land now that was settled by Indigenous people. This is a very Calgary, or Mohkinstsis, as they as one group, as the Blackfoot would refer to it, is the meeting place, the confluence of two rivers, a very sacred and important meeting place for Indigenous peoples, for different groups to come together to share ideas and have meetings and that. So we continue to live off that, but yeah, it's just stuff that wasn't talked about. And now we're talking about more and more, and I think that's good. And Gord and I also, we recognize the irony of a couple of tall, white bearded dudes talking about this stuff. But the same way that I look at myself as like an ally to my friends and brothers and sisters and non-binary folks and theys thems in the LGBTQ plus community, we try to also be part of the solutions for Indigenous reconciliation. That's talking about it candidly and frankly, and recognizing our own complicitness in it. It's a minefield, to be sure, because you can't help but feel like a hypocrite a lot of the time. I've got two issues of our Genki comics. Where we started off was making these mini issues, these long skinny issues that we did. So Gord did two of them, and they were based around immigration policy, and one about the Indian Act and the 60s scoop. And I've had two that I've kind of been sitting on for over a year now, and they're about one is a very scathing look at the Pope's visit to Canada after they found the unmarked graves on residential school land in Canada, and the other one is a look at a figure by the name of Grey Owl here in Canada that was a conservationist, but he was a white man.
Yeah, I remember.
Known as Grey Owl. He was known. He was no. He's
100%. I don't know how he ended up there.
He was just a British guy.
I didn't realize that. I saw the movie with Pierce Brosnan, I think.
Yeah, right? So he spent a lot of time. Now he was accepted by the communities of that, and that. So it's a weird thing. But he was a white guy, and it just, for me, it was like, okay, well, here's the stories we choose to tell in Canada. Is we wipe out everything that actual Indigenous people could be telling us about the land, but when this white guy takes on the affectation of them and says, let me tell you about the land, we all suddenly listen.
Like, oh, what's that?
Yeah. Oh, really? Would you like to? And then he was made basically an agent of the government in the realm of conservation. He was like the conservation proponent in this part of the world.
Icon there.
So it's tough because I've been sitting on those things, because sometimes, I get in my own head and I go like, is this a story that I like? Is it my place to tell this story? And I have to keep reminding myself, and it's like I said, it's been an over a year process to say, maybe you should, because if you look at yourself as like an ally to that narrative being told, I do think there's value there to do it.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I'm with you on that. I feel that it is what it is. If that's what's touching you, it's difficult. That's one of those things. As an artist, you kind of like, hey, this is what's meaningful to me right now. So I want to say something about it. And obviously, it matters to you. You're respectful about that. And it is also a thing too. I struggle with a lot of this stuff. You said it's a minefield, and it's true. A lot of these topics are. And I think a lot of people what's difficult is I do feel like a lot of narratives, and I say this a lot, I've been thinking about this a lot recently. I don't think I have all the answers or any answers really, but I think there are certain narratives that come from extreme directions, let's put it that way, in either spectrum, any political spectrum. I feel that there's a lot of these extreme narratives that really work for politicians, particularly corporations, particularly, and like, it'd be great if these people were fighting each other. It would be wonderful if we could get all of these people to just fight one another and not help one another. What I think you're trying to do here is help, and also express yourself artistically through some of these stories that aren't really being told. To me, that's okay. I think that's better than okay. And I would always, like I was talking about with the AI stuff, in this situation or any other situation where there's a rift, where there's a division, like, okay, this is what happened in the past. These are the things. Horrendous. Pretended like it didn't happen. So now it's another horrendous thing. And now it's, okay, what do we do? We're going to probably do nothing. That's another thing it piles on. Now, how do we... Like, this is not really a couple of comic book writers and artists here maybe aren't the ones to solve this issue, but since we're talking about it, here we are. I do wonder, like, okay, how do we get to the point where we are talking frankly and saying, I get it, this is what happened. It's a bit removed from the people who actually did it, because now we're talking about something that happened over 100 years ago, and then some of it not so much, some of it much sooner, 20 years ago.
Continuing on.
And it continues. So if we're not talking about it, it continues. How do we stop it? How do we say, okay, we've all lived here for a long time at this point. Maybe a lot of us have been born here as well. And so we're taking advantage of the things that happen. But at the same time, where's the connection point? Where's the point where we go, we're not separate. You're human beings. We're human beings. Some bad things happen. The way people thought back in the day was terrible. From what our perspective would be, probably from their perspective, they thought they were doing something that was right. You're like, oh, we'll get the savagery. That's terrible. Some of the stuff they do, we can't even imagine doing that. We better put them in a Christian home. Like, I could see that narrative happening in someone's mind and being like, that's the right thing. And then having no qualms about it. where we would never think that way now. So how do we
Yeah.
take our modern perspective, put not put aside, but just say this is the reality. This is we flip the stones. Here are the bugs that are underneath, and let's do what we can do to make this better. I just, without saying it's your fault, no, it was your fault, but no, it's your fault. That finger pointing back and forth kind of thing. And then saying, well, I'm going to join this team because they're against your team. And I'm going to join this team because they're against your team. And instead try to make some unity. Because honestly, it's not what I try to do with this podcast, but at least with me talking to you, me talking to the next person, I feel like that's a start in that direction. Even though all I want to do is find out about comic books and what you're doing and all that kind of stuff, and find out about the next person who's doing the kind of job they do, I feel like somehow this conversation keeps coming up over and over and over. So this is the conversation that obviously needs to be had. So what's your thoughts on it?
So a few things. I think it's, the most important thing I think is just having the conversation, because nothing bad can come, in my eyes, nothing truly terrible can come from the sharing of information and ideas. And when you get to have conversations about, like, where I'm talking about, like, the 60s scoop and the millennial scoop, stuff you might not have been really aware of, it shines a light on it. So yeah, like you said, when you pulled that rock back and you show the bugs that are underneath and you cast a light on it, somebody's eyes are going to be open. They're going to say, wow, I didn't even realize that was a thing. And then it's going to inform them. Maybe they're going to find more information on it. Maybe they're going, or maybe not. But I mean, I just think talking about these things is important, and being somebody who just, I want the world to have more information, not less information. So the more we learn about it, even when it's really hard stuff, like when I talk about that, we talk a lot about Canadian identity. A lot of it is challenging that Canadian identity, to say we're not just this squeaky clean place, lots of dirt here. But the more we know about it, the more we have a better understanding of not just the place we're in and our place in it, but other people. And for me, it's all about building people's empathy. Nowadays, I think a lot of people, it's very easy to forget about your empathy, to forget about that somebody else's, when you see, we see it all the time in this part of the world. If you see somebody on the street and you can tell that they're drunk, you might say to yourself, they've done that to themselves. Where you might be able to look at and say, oh boy, I wonder what their background is. I wonder what's brought them here. And as we're finding out more and more, when we talk about the way we have been treated Indigenous peoples in Canada, we're learning more about generational trauma. So we're seeing somebody who might be drunk on a street corner, but it's because they were kicked out of their home, or they were taken out of their home. And before that, their parent was taken out of their home and placed them into a residential school. And before that, their grandparents were locked up somewhere, or killed, or displaced from their land. And it was this generational thing that started, and it may have started 150 years ago, but it's led up to somebody being in dire straits on a street corner now. And for people to be able to say, I don't know for sure, but I can understand where someone could get here, that makes you go from going, ooh, away from me, to going, boy, shouldn't we offer this person some help? Should this person be given better options and better life outcome and better life options and outlook than they have now? So I want to, I hope that as we inform people, that their empathy will grow and their understanding of the whole world and their place in it can improve. And I said, I was up for a zine award from one of my ghost town zines, and I promise you
I was going to ask you about all of this stuff, but we got off on a great conversation, and this is how
we'll get to that. But one thing I said, I had to do a video. It was off in Toronto, and I was not able to get on a plane to go to Toronto, so I did a little little mini video for them for the Zine Awards. And one thing that came to my mind is I just went out into a thicket of some birch trees and did a video, and I was kind of just riffing along. And one thing that came to my mind is I said, history is something not just to learn about, it's to learn from. So seeing what's come before and how it was done can inform both what we do and what we do as a reaction to that. So I'm hoping that shining a light on this really dark history of Canada, that some people will say, I'm going to be part of a solution on that, and it can improve things. And like I said, just talking about it, I think, is just so important. What we've found, so Gordon and I do in our comics, we're doing one right now. Gordon's newest series is called Self-Worth. It's about a labor organizer by the name of Arthur Slim Evans. And what we found was he was super vocal. He was one of the very early people in Canada. He was down in the United States and saw some real crap down there. He got shot down by the Rockefellers by trying to organize coal miners in Colorado. Fled back into Canada, was nearly killed here as well. But he spoke out about this stuff, and as a result of him being one of the first people sort of like organizing and saying like, hey, when somebody's down on their luck and they lose their job, why do they starve to death? We live in a country abundant with food. Why does this happen? We can look at that through line from him speaking up and getting others to speak up and join a movement, to things like we have now, like unemployment insurance and food banks. And we're not perfect, and we're never going to be perfect. But boy, like we look at this one fella in one specific case, always speaking out for himself and others, and the positives that can come from that, even when it was major negatives to his own well-being. Like I said, he got shot down. Got shot in both legs by some regulators sent out by the Rockefellers in 1913, 1919,
Wow,
somewhere
serious.
there. And so our hope is we can speak up about this stuff, not catch bullets for it, hopefully, but affect maybe not the sweeping sort of things that a guy like Slim Evans came up with, but if we can just improve the world in some way, boy, I'd feel pretty good about that legacy. If people can just see my stuff and learn something from it that makes a positive, that's a good legacy to have.
No, that's fantastic. That makes a lot of sense to me. It also leads me to thinking about patience to some degree as well, because those things didn't necessarily happen immediately. And yes, you kind of have to take maybe not bullets in the legs right away, but you have to take some of the shots up front. But to see things change over time, just as you described things turning negative from a negative place and continuing to be negative over time, probably positives works in a similar manner. Being that if you're pushing towards a positive direction and also a realistic direction, because these problems are going to exist, they're going to happen. You said like we're never going to be perfect. Of course, it's never going to be perfect. We're trying to do well, and some of these do well systems make people not do well. And when it's not ideal, you do really badly, and it can lead to like starving, dying, being destitute, crime, all that kind of stuff. And if you don't have some kind of safety net, it's a problem. So pushing in a positive direction, pushing towards empathy is awesome. I'm really happy that you said that, because you can never come together if you see everyone as the other. So that's a beautiful kind of sentiment, and just the idea that, okay, have some patience, be the one who's pushing this stuff. You may not even see it in your lifetime. Maybe it'll be somebody else's lifetime, where it's like, okay, these rules and things are just standard, and we don't just have to starve or whatnot, which I think probably makes a lot of sense. I'm a big proponent. I'm a bit of a gray man in some of these areas, where I'm a big proponent of being like, hey, I've loved martial arts my whole life, so I've always loved to see like, hey, what's working over here and what's working over here, and it's probably not 100% from any camp, but probably we can take something and say, let's just rearrange this jigsaw puzzle in a way that works better. Not perfect, but better. And I kind of love that. And you guys, so just through this is crazy. Like, this is why I love comic books, because it affects people's lives so much. Just from this that you've done, the Zine Awards. There's a reason they gave you an award. I'm sure it was awesome. And
I guess shortlisted for the award. I didn't win it, but I was
okay.
shortlisted out of 200 plus zines that were sent in. I was shortlisted for my category of the info zines for the first ghost towns of Alberta one I did.
That's so awesome. And the ghost towns. Okay, so now I'm gonna shift directions then, because
Sure.
I wanted to talk about the ghost towns. Tell me how this started and tell me what these are, so that anybody, I kind of know, but if for people who don't know, I'd like them to know, like, how did that get going? Why did you decide to do these projects? And I know there's a few more coming. So what's going on?
Yeah. So Gord and I were creating. So Gord has been the big driving force in our collaboration thus far for a lot of the creative output of it. So I said, okay, I need to start creating some work. So we got more stuff at the table when we do markets and expos, and I need to practice. So I was trying to figure out what I would do. So I started by doing two things. I started doing these ghost town zines because I was interested in the history of that, of the rise and fall of a place, like why a place would rise up and why it falls down. I come from a town that it is very much in a similar vein. So my hometown isn't even a hamlet anymore. It used to be a hamlet. It lost its incorporated status, so it's just sort of part of the rural municipalities, like basically part of the county almost. So I find this stuff very interesting because as a kid, looking at or traipsing through abandoned buildings was a thing you did. You just you checked out cool abandoned buildings. So I really like these ghost towns where there's remnants of that past there that you can maybe go see and not to disturb it, but just to view it and just to feel a part of the fabric of that. So I actually, Gord and his partner and myself and my partner, we had done a trip a few years back where we went camping and then checked out a bunch of ghost towns. And so I had all these photographs that I had taken. So I said, oh boy, it would be fun to do a ghost town zine. So I made just a single zine and going, I don't know if I'll do another one of those or not. I also was doing these as another exercise for myself to try to get my brain into this mode. I was also adapting movies into these. Take an entire movie like a Die Hard or Rocky Horror Picture Show or Blade Runner and condense it down to an 8-page mini zine.
I saw some of those, the Rocky Horror Picture one. I saw that.
So for me, the Ghost Town one was for me to practice research, writing a narrative that could fit into this and creating something informational, and then the drawing portion. And for the movie ones, those were my exercise in editing existing works and adapting them to a wildly different format and with huge constraints. So those things for me were basically exercises. But then we went and we did some markets. We did some zine markets and comic markets, and the people's their reaction to these ghost town ones was so positive that I said, oh boy, I should keep doing these. So I did 2 more of them. So basically every time we're doing a major expo or a market, I try to have another one of these things done. So I did 3 of them in the last year and change. And I'm trying to do an even higher output over the next year. I actually just this past weekend, I was driving around central Alberta taking pictures of ghost towns. So I'm always trying to work on more of those. And it just so happened that my sister-in-law is a curator at an art gallery in Edmonton, and had heard through the grapevine, hey, there's this Zine Awards happening, and they're deadlines coming up for submissions. I had never heard of it before. So she sent it to me and said, hey, you should do this. And I said, nah, my rinky dink stuff. No. She said, Charles, just fucking send something in.
Yeah.
If you send something in, good things might happen, right? And I
It
went,
is.
yeah, I know. It's the same thing I tell people, like, hey, if you don't take your shot, you're never going to get it, right? So you might as well try. So I said, okay, yes, okay, I'll send one in. So I sent in the first two. I had two at that point. I had the Redcoat Trail and the Alberta Coal Branch, which is a collection of old coal mining towns. And they shortlisted the first one I had done, which was a surprise to me that the very first one I had done is the one that got shortlisted. So that was a huge honor. And when I saw the other stuff that was shortlisted as well, I was, boy, the company I was in was amazing. Some really, truly amazing stuff being made out there. So yeah, I was very, very lucky about that. And so now I'm every time I come out with another Ghost Town one, people seem very enthusiastic still about them. So because what I do is I want people to learn. So I write about the story of the rise and fall of these places and what caused it to exist there in the first place. And I also give them a map. I actually draw a map in there so that they can go and see these places, because I want people. So even this weekend when I was out going around, it's amazing how many of the ones I had on my list of, hey, go to these ghost towns and take pictures. I went there and I said, well, there ain't nothing here. So in the since the blog post I found that someone did in 2015 that said that they found this ghost town, it's gone. It's whatever happened, everything fell over, or it's someone's farmland and they ended up knocking the stuff down, whatever it is. So I'm always like, if we can get people out to see these little, like what I call these hidden gems of history, the more the better. The more that people see this stuff and see how it was, because it just gives people more of that understanding, like we were talking earlier, of that, like maybe going out of their comfort zone a little bit and seeing, like when you see a sod house and you see how people had to survive the winters in turn of the century 1900 versus where we're the comfort we live in now, it can really open your eyes to something.
That's funny. That's a thing I was thinking about today, because I was looking through some of my ideas, because I do one solo episode per like 4 or 5 interviews, let's say. I did one about Superman. Not that this is always about comics, it usually isn't, but I just had this idea of what the character Superman is and the perceptions everyone seems to tell me of what they think of Superman right now. So I was like, I have an idea about Superman. So I did that. But I had ideas about other things. And one of the things I mentioned in this, which I'm going to take a quick look at it. I said, yeah, any person alive, thinking, being a person strolling around on this planet, I'm worried we're not appreciating it. Because like you said, if you look at somebody who was living in a sod house or back in a coal mining town or something like that in that time, that's already pretty far. And then if we take it to like caveman times, I'm sure they were like, well, Gorp is dead, I guess. What happened? I don't know. He got eaten. That's something
ate him.
A terror bird got him, So I feel like if we're alive thinking, we're not like a slug getting eaten by birds or something, like we're here, we get to live in houses a lot of the time. I mean, some people don't, but it's something. And to just be like, I'm alive, I'm walking around, I'm breathing, I have these seconds to be alive. I think it's good to appreciate. So I could see how that would connect to history and being able to look back and say, these things are, you went to some of these places and these things are gone, like it was 5 years ago and it's already, that's it. It had its time and it's completely gone. So I like that you're immortalizing some of this stuff in a zine. I don't think I even was aware of zines until seeing your Twitch stream and seeing you do this. And I definitely got lit up to it during that time. And I see that it's sort of, I don't know when they started, but definitely I know it was a big deal in the 70s counterculture sort of era DIY. We're making these by hand and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And how did you get
Yeah.
into it? I mean,
Um,
just originally, when did you first run into a zine?
I I was roughly aware of zines in my youth. Like being able to make your own little publication, your own DIY stuff was always something I thought was a cool idea. I never really interacted with them that much. I never really interfaced with that a whole lot. But when it came time to do, a personal project for myself, I said, "What do I do that's small? It's not big. I want something that's small that I can produce on my own and do so like on a moment's notice or anything." So I was thinking like, well, how can I make something that doesn't require a lot of binding, doesn't require a lot of thought and work in the production side of things. And so the idea of doing zines just came so quickly with that. And I don't remember if it was Gord saying to me like, "Hey, you should consider this for like a zine format or not." I'm not 100% about that. I know that when I decided to do zines, when I sort of landed on that, okay, like this is how I'm going to do it. I had to go in and learn a bunch. So I went in like sort of the meat and potatoes of the saying to myself, okay, I want something that I don't have to think about glue or staples. Now, how can I do it? So, how can I take paper and by folding alone, folding or cutting, how can I make something? And then I discovered, like, yeah, like the 8-page classic mini zine where it's folded in such a way and has a cut in it that it creates this little booklet. To me, as someone who's been big on print production my whole career, like made my brain go crazy. I was like, oh, this is great. I love coming up with these like with new ways of doing things. And then some of the zines I've shown when I do my Twitch show where I showcase zines and comics from local creators. Some of the stuff in there, it's like there's this one from a young lady who did a bunch of Chinese dishes, and she folded it like an origami sort of thing. So it's like this fan, and it was all purely folded, and it opens and can reconfigure, and it's just the stuff I see these young zine creators make blows my mind. So I go, boy, once again, that idea of my little rinky-dink zines, I go, oh geez, I think I'm doing something fun. Or I did, my ghost town zines, they keep opening up until you have an 11 by 17 thing with a map on the inside.
It's so awesome.
But then I see like these ones where it's like this origami fan thing and these amazing things. It's just that what I love about zines is just so wide open to whatever the creator wants to do. There are no rules. There's none of this where, when you look at your traditional comic book, it's 6 5/8 by 10 1/4 or whatever it is, and double saddle stitch and folded, and it's usually on this kind of paper, or it's usually done like this way. Where zines, like my box, I have this short box of zines under my desk here, and every single piece I pull out of there is completely worlds different from the one I pulled previously. And that's, to me, like was the thing that made me go, oh my gosh, zines are so cool. And they're having a little bit of a renaissance again, which is great because several times in the last few decades, there's been the question, are zines dead? And I think people are using them again in a way that we saw in our, as we were coming up in the early 2000s, where everybody was starting a blog. Now, young people, they're making zines. Not all of them, of course. Lots of them are just starting a TikTok and talking into their phone.
Sure.
But some of them are taking that creative output and going, I'm going to make a physical thing out of this. And I think that's awesome. I like physical stuff.
I'm starting to see the power of this because from the beginning of our conversation to now, I think there's a connection there where it's like, what can people do? Well, I know what AI currently can't really make that because it just isn't that. I find nothing new so far. I mean, maybe down the road we could say, oh, write a story and then it tells a story. I've never seen a good AI story. It's maybe at best an outline, but that's pretty much it. And it doesn't have taste or vibe. It's just a programming. So to be able to say, I'm going to take this paper and I'm going to turn it into an origami fan, or I'm going to take a story that's my images from ghost towns, and that's going to tell the history. And as you unfold, you're going to see the entire map of the place, which is incredible. This is the thing I think that you need the human being for. It's just that je ne sais quoi. I guess we were talking about French earlier. So yeah, that's something you can't put your finger on, that X factor, maybe that consciousness, and maybe one day, there will be an alive, intelligent, artificial intelligence, but that's not what we have currently. So I feel like it's awesome to probably go in that direction. Of course, not everybody's going to, and that's just a small subset of people, but some people are doing it, and I think that's pretty cool. It's kind of blowing my mind too. You're really enlightening me on. I didn't realize the folding techniques, the cutting techniques, the fact that really you don't need any of this printing method. Like, comics are already kind of simple, not really. There's still printing involved in everything, but to take that away and be like, no, we can actually do this almost by hand in a way, and have it be folded in such a way that it's now a booklet. You have a real thing, almost like a message in a bottle. I kind of I love that idea. There's a magic to that.
Yeah, and how much of these zines are there? Most of them, you find they're self-published works. So people are just like, they're printing them themselves. The beauty of some of this stuff is you can go to the library, you can slap it on the top of the Xerox machine, and you can make yourself, a handful, 50 zines, and take them home, fold them up, cut them, put them together, and then and the way that these things tend to change hands, it's all such a personal process. Like, when I meet people at a market and hand them my zine, and we have that interaction of talking, and no computer can ever, no AI can ever replicate that. There's something where they know it's been built by my hands, and handed to them personally, and we've had a conversation and a connection about that. That part of the human element can't be replicated.
That's so awesome. I'll shift right, because I realize I'm going to talk to you for probably forever if I if I don't, just because you're a great conversationalist, and I like to hear your perspective on a lot of this stuff. So we kind of
and I like to talk.
well, that's why you have like, again, it's White Gray Black is your Twitch stream. I know you have Comic Zone there, where you've talked about a lot of these underground zines and comics that nobody would see otherwise, I think. So again, I think people should check that out. But I want to ask you about another topic as well. Tell me a little bit about These Two Hands.
Oh yeah, so With These Two Hands, all smushed together, With These Two Hands is kind of the name I gave to my creative output. So whether it be music or music and art. So the Twitch streaming is all done under White Gray Black, because that's been my gaming handle for 25 years.
Wow.
But basically, as long as you could put a name on a video game account, it's been White Gray Black for me. But With These Two Hands, it's something I came up with a few years, several years ago, because White Gray Black, there was a band under that name already. So I went, okay, well, I can't use that for absolutely everything anymore, so I need to figure something out. And I wish I still had it. At some point on a Post-it note, I found I had just doodled this thing, and it was of these, so this stylized thing is sort of two hands, and I wrote With These Two Hands all together in my scraggly script. And I looked at that and I went, oh, that's the thing. Can I get the domains? Yes, I can. Awesome. Let's do that. So that's kind of been the thing that I've put the rest of my creative output under, is With These Two Hands. And so that's, like I said, that's illustration stuff, that's the comics and the zine stuff, that's music, because I'm a musician as well, and I kind of, that's my other catch-all.
I was gonna say, because there's a song out right now. I noticed you posted about it. I also see guitar in the background. So how did music get going, and like how did this latest song sort of come to be?
Yeah, so it's it's sort of a story that's very similar to the comic book side of things, like getting into it later in life here. The music stuff's sort of similar. So growing up, I always wanted to play musical instruments, but I could never afford one. And I could never, and I could never, when I was young, decide like, is this something I'd actually stick with? Would it be wise um, to get an instrument? And so I kept thinking about it all the way through sort of like middle and high school. I wanted to play music so bad, but I could not afford an instrument. And then I got into college in Medicine Hat College. I was in a student residence there, and due to I applied for scholarships and bursaries for my first year there, and I got a bursary that's sort of based on your academics, but also financial need. And because I came into school with no money, so it was all like I went on student loans 100% all the way through school. So luckily, I got this bursary of $1,000 first. Like it was like literally like winning the lottery for me. I was like, oh my god, I this is going to change my life, right? And so what did I do? I turned around. I didn't spend all of it. Most of it went towards food, lodging, and food. But I did take 300. I think it was $350 of that, and I bought a drum kit.
Oh,
So because as I was coming up, I was kind of like I would tap along with my CDs and cassettes and stuff growing up. And I remember, I think it was like a Stone Temple Pilots,
nice.
their first CD. I was tapping along with that, and Eric Kraitz is a big influence on me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm tapping my limbs. I'm actually tapping my limbs to it. And I was probably like 16, 17 at this point. And I said, man, I bet you I could play the drums. One day maybe I can afford drums. So fast forward a couple years later, I get this bursary and I bought a drum kit and then just started self teaching myself.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, and luckily I drove people crazy in
Yep.
my student res. They were a townhouse style. We were at the very end of it, so we only had one neighbor. But I'm sure I drove them crazy. I drove everybody who lived with or next to me crazy for the next 3 years. But luckily, and even worse, in my second year, I had a couple of friends move into the res with me, and they all played instruments. They were playing guitars and basses and that. So we had punk bands and stuff going on all the time.
Beautiful.
So that it, and luckily because of that, my friend who played the bass allowed me to play his bass while I was in college as well with him. He was there for a couple of years, so I got to get hands on with a bass and go, oh, okay, I can learn. I can play bass as well. It turns out in my sort of like really really bad habit sort of way, and then picked up my own bass during college when I a year later, and then didn't pick up guitar until I think it was 2006 is when I bought my first guitar. And now I've got a basement room full of guitars and basses and an electronic drum kit and electronic percussion instrument and a bunch of synthesizers and self-taught on all that stuff. And so I played in some bands coming out of college. We played here in Calgary a few times. And then I've just kind of been playing on my own for my own enjoyment and writing stuff, but never really recording and releasing stuff just because I find the recording process, the recording and mixing is exponentially harder than coming up and writing a song. Writing a song is easy. Making it into a thing that's real, that you'd feel comfortable with someone else listening to, that's the hard part. So I put that off for years and years and years and years. So I've been here in Calgary for 23 years this year.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
every year, and I guarantee you, every year in those 23 years, I've said to myself, this is the year. This is the year you record an album, You take all this stuff you've had that you've been brewing and stewing on, and you put something out. And I put it off, and I put it off, and I put it off. So since my 20s, I've talked about recording stuff, and I've even had like, I buy a Mac Mini that with GarageBand so I can start recording, and then found out how much of a pain in the ass it was, and so I'd half record things and then drop them. So 20 years has gone by. So finally this year, I said, you know what? I'm going to record something and put it out, and I did that. So, and the way that came is actually through the comic book. It's the comic books that made it. It's comics that made it happen.
Oh, how so?
So Gord and I, we got a provincial art grant for our next graphic novel. So we were in Vancouver, just the two of us. We rented a place out in Surrey, and we were driving into Vancouver every day to do research for this next graphic novel. And we were listening to a ton of industrial metal.
Oh.
And also protest songs. I was putting on like, hey, Gord, you got to listen to this live album I have from Chris Christopherson. It's all this like Vietnam era and through the 90s era protest songs. You got to listen to this stuff. Oh, cool. And meanwhile, we're listening to like, Old Ministry and the Machines of Love and Grace, and we're listening to what else? Like just all sorts of awesome industrial music. I've been big in industrial music since my teens, and Gord has as well. So we were having a conversation one day as we're taking our like 25-minute drive from Surrey into downtown Vancouver, and we had just finished listening to the last of the Chris Christopherson live album I had, and then started listening to some Ministry again. And I said, Gord, it struck me like, it's kind of funny that for us as our like these Gen Z or Gen X, the late Gen Xers, for us, our protest music was this industrial stuff. Like this for us was what folk music and like acoustic folk music was for the protest movement in the 60s and 70s. For us in the 80s and 90s, especially as we got into the 90s, it was industrial music was our protest music. And we had been talking about companion albums for things. A big influence on me is The Crow by James O'Barr. I've got it up on the shelf up here. He commissioned a companion album to go along with his graphic novel. And it came out in basically 3 different versions: an original 1991 demo, a 1994 remastered one, and then a 1998 further remastered version. And each of them are different, but it was industrial music. His friend is John Bergen from a band called Trust Obey. And I was also talking to Gord about this fellow out in Winnipeg by the name of Nicholas Friesen. He does a comic book about this character of his, Olivia C. And in that, he's been in sort of like post rock, I'll call them bands. I'm probably misgenreing him, but I'd call him like indie music and post rock stuff. And so when he made this comic about Olivia C, he writes and records music with his group of musicians for each issue of this. And I was going, boy, companion things are cool. So the thing about Gord that you have to understand that I have to always remember is, if I pitch something to Gord and he likes it, it has to happen. He goes, okay. Yes, when is it going to happen? So I was saying, so we're having this conversation about protest music, industrial music being our version of that. And I was talking to him about these companion albums. I said, wouldn't it be interesting if I wrote and released like an industrial album to coincide with, to be a companion album for this
okay, so I see where we're coming from.
Novel. So we're driving and he turns to me and goes, yes. When can you have it? When can you do it? You can do that, and we can put it out at the same time as the graphic novel. And I was going, yeah, probably. I guess I could. I mean, I've got the stuff to record it. I could write stuff. And I said, kind of funny, like as I brought it up to him, I was thinking about songs and thinking of like sort of touch points in the story that we're telling in this historical story of like, oh, here's something I could write something about. They said, so could you do it? And I said, well, I kind of have like the kernel of a couple songs in my head already. He said, great, do it. So I kind of by necessity, the way I've done on a lot of this comic stuff, I locked myself into it by being beholden to somebody in a collaboration. It's great because
It
it's
helps.
causing me to say, okay, I actually have to do something. It can't be something where it's one of Charles's harebrained, boy, I'd love to do this thing, and then 20 years go by. So I decided to start with an easy one. So I did an adaptation of a song called "The Tramp" by Joe Hill. Joe Hill was a Swedish guy who came to the United States when he was a younger guy, and was like I was telling you about that Slim Evans.
Mm-hmm.
He was like him. He was a laborer going from place to place, big in the like socialist and labor organization movements, and he was a songwriter. So he almost like a Weird Al Yankovic character. He would take a popular song. So he would take a song that's out there. Most of the stuff that he wrote were to the tune of a popular song, and he would make new lyrics for it, and then he
Okay.
would sing them, and because of that, they were easy for people to pick up. So when you're singing a song that's to a very popular song in 1910, everybody knows. Like when a song hit back then, every single person in the country knew that song
Yeah, it's like
and
there's
could
only 10 songs. So
yeah,
it's like
and,
how many
and
we've heard this and then everyone else is whistling it somewhere along the way. It's kind of amazing too
exactly.
how that could happen. But yeah,
so for
continue.
so for him, he looked at that as a lot of like, this is the tool for us to organize people and to tell them about how they have value and worth and things like that, and how we're being mistreated by the higher up people. Because he'd say, a pamphlet will be read once and never again, but a song will be sung over and over and over and over, and people will memorize it and pass it on, and it will live on and live on and live on and be this tool and this thing that we use for sharing ideas. Much like, when we're talking about Indigenous people and their understanding of the land, it's the same way that they would tell their stories, is mostly through song and story, and that's what Joe Hill would try to do. So I took an adaptation. I looked at this song called "The Tramp," and because I found, as we were doing our research in Vancouver, I found a handwritten note from the daughter of Slim Evans, who ended up being his biographer. She had just written on a piece of paper. I found this scrap of paper that was, I think, maybe a folded up issue of like a socialist newspaper or something, and it said "The Trap, Joe Hill." And I went, "Hold it, okay, if that was important enough to them, like we've been talking, we were finding stuff about these songs that were being sung all the way through, but to find like a handwritten note, I said, okay, this was important enough to them that she made a note of this song. I'm going to look at this song," and I found it was a cool song, and I said I wrote an industrial sort of marching beat to go with it. And it's a very long song, because those protest songs tend to be, they have a lot of verses, and because I expanded upon them, I didn't just take the words as they were. I wanted to expand and modernize them a bit. It ended up being a 7-minute song,
Well, heck yeah.
and so I recorded that and released it a couple weeks
A
ago.
couple weeks ago.
Something like
I saw it there, and I want to say, I've had somebody on this podcast who's also a comic book creator. His name is Ed Luce. He made a comic book called Wovable Oaf, which is this whole, I can't even explain. It's this whole professional wrestling, gay, cat loving character who's this just giant dude and he also put out kind of an album or several tracks of grindcore metal
Yeah,
that went along with the comic books as well. So it's kind of an interesting um, situation there too. So I feel like you're in good company with that stuff.
that's
I
good.
was I was just thinking about the music too, because I've been struggling to learn Japanese for a long time. I get a little bit of it here, a little bit of it there. But I'll tell you this, there's a Japanese rap song that I like. I can sing every single word, no problem. You know, I've got it all locked down. I don't need to try to memorize it. I've got it, you know? So, you were talking about indigenous people like the Mongolian steppe in Chinggis Khan's time, right? That's the way they used to tell messages to one another for their military actions and stuff. There was a song, and you'd replace some of the verses with the new information, so that it wouldn't get messed up in any way. You could kind of keep a structure going. So I think
Yeah,
it's really cool that you made like kind of a song that goes along with this, and just it. I don't know. There is something about comic books, which is like this sequential artwork with a message in it a lot of the time, and music, and
yeah,
they somehow are tied together in that way. So it's really
yeah,
cool.
yeah. We look at our graphic novel work and our comic work for this history stuff the same way that Joe Hill looks at his music. Like, a textbook or a Wikipedia entry, that sort of thing, might touch you in some way, but you're not going to come back to it over and over. But telling something in a visual way that brings together the craft of like art and writing and the topic that and the themes that you're doing and what you're hoping people will take from it, putting that stuff together, like, makes it the special thing that I think we hope that people will be able to come back to over and over and find to be more engaging. And just the way that Joe Hill looked at that, like something that people will come back to over and over and over, and be touched further by that, and affect them even more.
That's amazing. You know what? I'll ask you one last thing. So we went way past what I normally want to do, but this is what happens. This is how it goes. Um, I actually planning it. You're the first person I'm going to ask this, but I'd like to ask more people this question because I think it tells a lot. If you happen to have an answer, great. If you don't, then you don't. But it's what's the best mistake you've ever made, and how did it lead to something better? Just in the vein of, we've been talking about how things shift, how things that are maybe bad can be shifted to something good down the line, or things that don't look so good right now maybe can change. Or we've talked about waves, so I feel like it makes sense to ask you, like, what's a big mistake, or that you would consider your best mistake because it actually was something best.
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit when I was on the Windbag stream on Twitch recently, and
Love the
I
windbag.
kind of I
Shout out
talked about,
windbag.
yeah, shout out the Windbag. So I talked about how putting things off for so long in my life. I talked to you about, for 20 years I've been talking about recording music. I'm finally doing it, and for years and years I wanted to do comics and zines, and never did, and now do it. Those are like things I have, like, that's been sitting in the back of my mind as a regret, like this regret that's growing like a pearl in my head for the last 20 years, right? But now I find, and I said on the Windbag stream, like, I feel like my superpower now is that I'm in my 40s, because I put that stuff off for 20 years, but I've been thinking about it constantly. That now, like, it happens very quickly. So going from not doing comics to doing comics happened like that. The going from never doing zines to doing zines happened pretty darn quick. And as I found, and it was surprised me even, when I kind of was working on say the song, so the song Tramp that I put out this last couple of weeks, I had been thinking about a lot and practicing the parts in that. But when I sat down to record it and make it, it literally was like a 4-day process of me, from when I went into my home studio and said, I'm going to start recording this and doing it, and had never sung it before. I had written the lyrics, but I had never sung it to the song before, because I'm just one person, and I had never done the vocal style that I did it in ever in my life. I went into the studio. I went into my home studio, recorded the song. Even it changed and evolved as I was doing it. Like I put in a different a bridge that I had only thought, like, wouldn't it be nice to have a bridge, to saying, here is a bridge and a solo. I wrote the solo that day and recorded it that day. And I went from never singing it before to just singing it and doing it, and then had it mixed and ready to go. Like I went in on Monday, and then by Thursday I was like, okay, I've got my song. So
Wow.
putting stuff off has always, like, been pretty rough. Like I beat myself up a lot about that. But now I find that I'm older, and I've thought about this stuff enough, and like done the little, it's like, it's the Karate Kid thing. It's a Karate Kid paradigm, right?
You know,
Where
wax
I've
on,
done the
wax
wax
off.
on, wax off. I've done the paint the fence. I've done all these little things, and all of a sudden you go, holy shit, I'm doing
I'm doing
karate all of a
karate.
sudden. Because you're like, all of a sudden when you go to put it all together, it happens very quickly, and you suddenly go, I've been building muscle memory, selective, like little bits of muscle memory, but when you put them together, it can all come together. So that's, to me, that's my biggest regret in my life, was putting stuff off for, like, because I had to become focused on a career, because I had to be focused on, like, just making things happen, that I put stuff off for 20 years. But now that I'm sitting down and doing it, and and in that mode, it just seems to be happening faster than I thought it would, which is great. Like, it seems to be more painless, which is good.
You know, I think I could follow you on that a little bit too. That's interesting. You're sparking some of my recent experiences as well. Because, well, first of all, with podcasting, I've been doing it for a little while now. I think I've interviewed over 50 people at this point. But I think it was in
Yeah.
my 20s. I had the idea to. I was like, I want to interview 1,000 people. You know, so I can just understand people and get a picture of it. Like, what is everybody doing? There's Masashi had a thing that he said, know the ways of all professions. And I thought, like, is there a way I could at least have a taste of that? Because in his day there were like 4 professions, but now there's like 8 million, so we're in trouble. But there's that one. There's also, recently my wife and I were we decided we were going to make a game for our nieces and nephews, and we made one for Christmas where it was like a full board game, and we painted the miniatures, right?
Cool.
And so I've never painted anything. I don't do arts and crafts. She's an arts and crafts kind of person. She grew up with that, but I didn't really do that. But I did do the digital version of my comic book when I wanted to fix up the backgrounds. I did all the coloring, the cutting, and the animation for that. And so I was like, all right, I'm willing to take a jump on this. And so I think maybe some of that, because I used a Wacom and I used like a digital pen.
Yeah.
So I think maybe that helped me a little. And when I jumped into this, I was able to do that. We fast forward to, we're like, hush, hush, don't tell anybody, but we're making something new that has a lot more miniature stuff in it, like the full
Right on.
landscapes and all that, using foam and all this crazy stuff. So we were able to I'm just able to paint this stuff right now. And I was like, I never painted anything, but this looks like a rock to me, you know? So I think maybe I follow where you're coming from. So in a
Yeah.
way, your biggest mistake was procrastination, but also it's working really well for you now.
Yeah, and sometimes I think it's like you do. So when I was being trained to be a designer, a graphic designer, went to an award ceremony. We went as a class to see these professionals who were up for these awards. And the one guy I'll never forget, he got up there and he said, his studio was up for, I think, 3 different commercials were up for awards. And they were asking him, like, how is it that you're knocking out of the park with every single project you're doing? And he said, he says, when you first start doing this, he says, I'm an older guy. I've been doing this a long time, and that's why we're able to have a consistent quality. He said, my first 1,000 were shit, and I'd never show them to you. They were stuff that I'd find embarrassing, but you have to get that first 1,000 out of you before you're hitting every time. And I think procrastination, in a way, as long as, for at least from my point of view, because I kind of like planned and stopped and planned and stopped and planned and stopped so many times, and I've worked through so many different things. Like, this is like, this song I just put out is probably it's one of the things I'm most proudest of in terms of a musical composition of the way it came together, but it's probably the 1,000th song that I've written, uh, usually just playing for myself. So there are songs that I originally wrote way back like 1998 when I first started getting into being able to play instruments that I would never show anybody now. They're embarrassing to me. But you kind of get, so even if you're putting stuff off, you're kind of putting the money in the bank there. You're counting towards those first 1,000 that are gonna suck. And then when you finally do it, hopefully you are hitting on all cylinders. So yeah, I think that's why, like with your miniature painting, you can come into it. You've got the experience enough that you know what you like and what you don't like, and you've seen techniques and talked to people and watched a lot of YouTube even. And where you come into it with the kind of knowledge that, back before the internet, that you would have had to do 1,000 miniatures before you say, oh, I finally painted the hair correctly. Finally, took me 1,000 of them. We're able to come into those things now with more of that sort of like, not quite experienced, but kind of experienced, stuff under our belt.
That's amazing. Wow. This has been one hell of a conversation, man. And I guess the best place to see you oftentimes is Twitch. Is it your Twitch stream, or is there anything new or different where you'd want people to see you to go check out some of this work? I'll put obviously any links you want in the show notes so that people can find it. But for now,
there's basically two places. There's my website, which is withthese2hands.com. There I kind of just have a compendium of all the places you can find me. So that's got the Twitch, it's got my design business, it's got my music stuff, it's got the comic stuff that I'm doing with Gord with Genki Comics. It's got links to all that stuff. So withthese2hands.com is a great place to start. But yeah, I actually, in the last year, I've started doing a lot of my zine work and illustration stuff live on Twitch, because I like to be able to chat with people while I'm doing it, talk about why I'm doing what I'm doing, and then when something goes wrong, we figure it. I talk through what the heck I'm going to do to salvage it, or I talk about what, it's just fun to riff about that stuff while you're doing it, and I even. The last few times I've done a big print run of my zines, we throw a public domain horror movie on, like an old Bela Lugosi movie, and I fold the zines and we just chat and watch a movie, do a watch party basically. So I do a lot of that stuff on Twitch live there, and I play games and stuff as well. So.
Yeah, no, I've had some fun. I know that you play games. You also read poetry sometimes. I've saw a lot of poetry readings in the past.
Yeah, it's been a while, but I plan on getting back. That's the Sunday Scaries Reading Club. We'll get back onto that soon.
You got a lot going on, but no, well, congratulations on the song. Congratulations on the nomination with the zine, and I'm looking forward to some more Canadian history. I mean, you and I think we solved all of Canada's problems with this conversation now, so we're in shape.
We at least shone the light on it, and that's the good first step.
We're getting there. But I want to thank you for being here and kind of giving us a peek into your world. So thanks for dropping by and being a part of it.
I'm honored to have been invited to this. This is great.